InsightAI, powered by Insight Jam.
Doug Shannon, we are launching a new podcast all about AI with you. And I thought it would be great if we could start by talking about what I consider to be right now the hottest conversation in AI at the moment, and that is AI agents, agentic AI. If you Google it, all kinds of things pop up. AI Pioneer says agentic machine translation has huge potential, building an AI simulation with agentic workflows for Amazon Web Services. Generative AI agents will revolutionize AI architecture. Andrew Ng, who is the founder of Google Brain and a Stanford computer scientist of note, presented at Sequoia Capital, one of the largest venture capital companies, just a couple months ago. A very compelling, I would say it was an hour-long presentation amongst some of the smartest and most deep-pocketed audience about where agentic AI was going to go and how, when combined in workflows, can blow doors off of what is currently generative AI. So you've been, I'm sure, watching a lot of this, and I know you've been to your fair share of talks and conferences. Give me your take on where we are with agentic AI.
Yeah, actually on that point, right? The original agent discussion that Andrew Ng had at Sequoia was mainly agents. It was mainly agent driven. It started to be even multi-agent driven, which was great, because I do believe that's where a lot of the future of the innovation's going. But literally, that was like 2 months ago, and then now we have people like Jim Fan from Nvidia saying we're in the agentic era. So we went from agents and understanding the basics of how they work and what they look like and how they can leverage current LLM technology and multimodal technology, and how you can bring that into a much more personal scale. And now we're talking about how to drive processes with Agentic, and it's really interesting stuff. So yeah, I could dive into the agent side, or yeah,
break it down. I mean, how are people thinking about combining agents? I mean, that's how I understand it. You basically create a workflow of individual AI agents that have, much like a team, have individual tasks that stack on top of one another. For instance, writing code, checking code would be a separate agent, potentially improving code. There's a kind of a workflow involved with individual AI agents. Am I anywhere near?
Yeah, right. So it's complicated because there's not only is there not like a ton of acronyms and a ton of different ways to look at it, but agents are all the way from, like, the example you're giving was like the dev tools, and like they had the little 8-bit characters, and these guys they're like the manager, and there's like the project manager, and then there's like the coders, and how you can actually have those agents all working together on the same thought process or the same, generalized process. But when you talk to agents and you look at what they mean, you have Microsoft with Copilot, right? So that's an agent. It's an agent that's on your desktop or on your laptop. And now we have Apple coming out with Apple Intelligence. Well, they call it AI, but it's Apple Intelligence. But we're just going to call it like Apple AI because it makes way more sense.
We'll have a whole separate podcast on where they're going.
Yeah. So the future where everything's kind of combining, and that's so the way that a lot of innovation works, is where you have something that changes the world with LLMs, the same way the internet changed a lot of things that we do every day. And these giant LLMs are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But then at the same time, we're building these smaller ones, and these smaller ones that work with agents or agent to agent are showing up and actually doing better than the billion parameter models of these very large instances, because it's not one thing that Andrew didn't talk about in that one since it was 2 months ago, but now we're talking about with agentic workflows and agents, is that we're starting to get that chain of thought. And so the chain of thought, the chain of reason, and what I also add in there is like chain of custody, but that's, again, we'll talk about that. And it's probably a future one, but chain of thought is great, because what it does is it takes down not just the prompt, but it takes the parts of the prompt. It takes the part of the question. So when you're talking to something like an agent, it's going to then break down, Doug said this, or this is the question that Doug had, and here's why maybe Doug had it. Maybe it even looks at, what access do I have? What role-based access controls like RBAC, and what role do I play at the company? What job do I have? Why am I asking these questions? And so understanding that thought process is key to actually really answer the question, right? And that's how you ground it, right? So we talk about these agents, we talk about LLMs, and we've gone from LLMs talking about hallucinations to things that I talk about like hypnotizations, to where you can like hypnotize it to think whatever you want it to think in general terms. But then agents have that same problem, but how do they ground themselves then? How do they ground themselves in the data and the drive of what you're asking? And then this is how, right? The chain of thought is really driving that forward.
Well, so what have we seen subsequent to that Sequoia presentation? Are we starting to see this now in Gemini? Are we starting to see this in some of the releases? I mean, where are we going to see practical applications? I know Nvidia, Jensen had a whole presentation last week around digital humans, which I think is an unfortunate phrase. I can't believe they came out with the idea of digital humans, but that's what they did, or whatever. Is it digital humans? Is that what they called?
That was one part. And so they're creating NIMS, which is Nvidia Intelligent Machines or something like that. And in regards to that, I think I might have that acronym wrong, but they're kind of creating that. Microsoft just created NPUs, which is neural network processing units or neural processing units that are now going to be on motherboards with your CPUs and your GPUs. But these NPUs are going to be driving the overall use of AI. So essentially, kind of like we talked about with like hyper-threading and cores of multi-core systems way back when, and we had to go more cores and more cores. Now we're basically saying, well, let's do hyper-threading with different aspects. So the GPUs doing graphical users, information, right? The CPUs driving the computer side, and the NPUs are driving the AI side. So, but they're all going to work together like in the classical forms of that. And that's essentially back to agents, right? That's kind of how they're going to work is you're going to have agents that do certain things. You're going to have agents that are on the user side, and they're just helping to fill that blank page. Like the user's saying, hey, I need to do this report. I need to send this email. How do I start this off? Oh, that's a really great start. Now I need to put my own data into it and my own self into it so that it's mine and not just an LLM's or an agent's information. We're going to see a lot of that, and that's going to be building that ease of use for the users, for the employees, for the people to be able to actually accept this and understand how much value it brings back to them. And so that's how the agent side works with that side for the most part.
Well, and I think what people, are expecting, or what they will ultimately, I think there's probably been a lot of behind the scenes user testing and focus groups and so forth. I don't think Nvidia has stumbled into this digital human concept on a spur of the moment. I think they've probably done some testing and determined that this is ultimately what people want, right? They want people to help them and to be able to think about it as, well, I have this agent that can help me with this, and I have, or this collection of agents that I can put to use in my task as a complementary team of artificial intelligence that will get the job done while I'm thinking bigger thoughts.
Right. I mean, part of it's getting the job done, right? Every company is looking, how do we do it? What do we do? How do we know what we need to do? And many of these new technologies and innovations are innovating around what humans don't do well. Right. So we don't do certain things well. We don't like doing, Huckleberry Finn said it best, like he didn't want to paint that fence. Like it was just boring. Right. So the boring things, repetitive things we don't want to do. And we do see that where AI comes in and says, we're doing Gen AI and now we're doing Agentic, because they're understanding there are those processes and those tasks that we don't want to do. So they're going to have AI do it. And then we have the process side of automation. And we're saying we've been doing that, we've been automating, we've been building that, and we have audit controls. Now we have to find a way to mix the two together. And really, again, that's where agents come in, right? Because agents can say, oh, I can take that Gen AI side, build that process, understand what the human doesn't want to do, take that and actually drive that to be automated in the same automated sense that automation users and practitioners have been using for the last 8 years. And so there's a lot of big win-wins. It's just not many are doing it yet. There are some in the space that are building expert agents, and these expert agents are doing some radical stuff because agents have the ability to do even more so than what we're talking about. They have the ability to have a persona. They have the ability to have, again, that chain of thought, but that chain of thought can go around an actual behavior. So we can say, act as, it's kind of like we have with like prompting, but like we can actually have it act as an individual of a certain layer or a leadership level, but that layer can actually have quantifiable needs and requests and things that it can do and actions that we can provide it. And so these expert agents can do, I mean, almost magical things that we've never been able to do before, to where we can actually enable them to do more and still have human in the loop to where we're rounding that off and gaining that perception.
Yeah, I mean, it's the magic combination of pattern awareness,
like recognition,
and recognition, and just an ungodly amount of memory and memorization. More to the point, memorization. I mean, that's the magic formula here. Is just it isn't. We haven't reached this kind of generative or the artificial general intelligence, obviously, though everybody is desperate to try to sort that one out next.
But it's getting there, right? Yeah.
But that's going to be really hard because
AGI is not coming anytime soon. They thought it was going to come. Even Andrew Yang 2 months ago was saying, hey, it's more of a journey now, but that's because at the beginning of this year, everyone, all the big companies, especially OpenAI, was saying we're doing AGI, and they're still saying that, but
I think the leaps that have been made in generative AI lead you to believe that. I think everybody on the layman's side of things are blown away at the advancements. Like you said, 2 months ago is now, the conversation 2 months ago is now almost out of date with every new conversation, at least at a certain level, I think.
At a certain level.
But
we're definitely still talking about agents, right? Agents are still key in this process going forward.
Yeah, let's continue down this path because I do want people to understand kind of at the molecular level. I mean, we've talked about it, but where are these agents? I mean, so generative AI sits on a large language model and does anything you ask it, but an agent doesn't do that. Is that how I understand it? It is effectively sitting on a much smaller set of data and leveraging that so it can work more discreetly. Or maybe it's assigned to a smaller set of
the neat
data.
The neat thing is that agents can kind of do also a massive number of things, but you do want to. So that's the difference between agentic versus agent, right? Agents are going to do like single tasks or multiple single tasks or defined processes, and you want them to do that because they become fast. They stay fast. With agentic, you're more along looking at how do we use Gen AI to drive entire processes. And so what happens is like, my belief, right, is that we'll see agentic come and go, just like we're seeing everything kind of move and shake. But agentic will come and go because you need so much compute just to run it. It's going to be slow. But if you were to build out multi-agent frameworks where you have multiple agents driving different variables, driving different parts of the company, driving to understand different aspects of like where the data is, where it lies, and where it's all going, that's where the value is going to come in. And so enterprises right now are all very siloed and can't move very fast, not just because they're enterprises, but it's just because trying to bring in Gen AI is not easy. There's massive cost concerns because you can't predict it ahead of time. There's massive, like, what can we do with these giant LLMs? And the most use cases you get out of is like, let's build a knowledge base, or let's go talk to our data and use RAG. Like, fantastic. Like, we can use retrieval augmented generation, but that's essentially it. And so when people start to realize that, they go, whoa, hold on. This is great. there's still some cost to this. If we enable everyone to do Gen AI inside of an enterprise, we're talking millions of dollars. Do we want to do that? Is it safe? Maybe we get sued, right?
Well,
So,
there are a whole host of implications with regard to the fact that what you may want these LLMs to enable internally is
safer.
Yeah, I mean, you actually end up, in order to get, say you're doing a press release for some sort of, delicate piece of information that isn't supposed to be released for another couple months, and you're using generative AI models to wordsmith it.
Yeah.
You're potentially releasing it into this public LLM in advance of when you actually want it out. I mean, there's control issues, data control issues. There's a whole host of other kind of corporate control issues that come along with allowing anybody in your organization to start taking advantage of these things.
I mean, some of the stuff that people worry about is literally that even with OpenAI, and if you connect to some of these larger companies, they're still very black boxed. They say, hey, if you do our API or you do a professional service, we're not collecting your data, and we're not building that into our own back end. And even when you first mentioned, like a lot of the conferences I've been to, and I go to a lot of them, and I try to be as much engaged, especially in the San Francisco area that I'm around, a lot of the AI researchers right now that are looking at agents, that are looking at anything, and just as large LLMs, are starting to say, we're running out of data. And that's a high concern, because then they're saying, but we need more data. And they're building this synthetic data, which is probably a whole other episode, but like synthetic data in general is just like data made up by LLMs. Although there's some grounding and there's some, some function there, like, is it right? And then, there's a whole mess of terms there. But yeah, agents can help with that, and agents can be that collaborative tool that we use to interact with these LLMs much easier, so that we don't really have to learn prompting. We just have to actually really learn how to talk to our agent friend that's going to take advantage and help us to drive some of that nuance.
Yeah. So is this your experience with regard to how these things kind of come about? I mean, generative AI landed on us, a little over a year ago, but it's been coming. It hasn't always been compelling, but then it became compelling, almost immediately compelling with ChatGPT 3, and so now, once it's kind of released into the wild a little bit, and people start to say, I can see where this is going. You get this, kind of swerving down the highway of, well, maybe we'll go this way, and then you're banging off the guardrails. Maybe you'll go this way, and it's kind of this zigzaggy path. Is this where you see agents and agentic AI headed as well?
I think so, but the reason why we see like the swaying, right, is, and I've done some research on this, especially being like a practitioner here, is that, when you have the adoption curve, right, like the big adoption curve, early adopters and everybody in the middle, and then everybody that comes later that goes like, oh, that's really cool, right? So AI and Gen AI kind of skip back and forth because there's like it's the fact that like it's part of our culture already. It's part of our like nerd culture, even because it's in the movies, right? Like we've watched this since the 80s. We've had these great things, and at which point, like when we see this stuff, we're like, wow, I want that. We had all the movies, right? Like from Terminator to AI to all this other stuff, and now AI, traditional AI, never really had the function that gave us that ability. But when Gen AI came in and gave us that searchability, that ease of use took off, and that's the wildfire approach. And then we are seeing where that goes later, and we are seeing it still kind of jump around, because it's now with a new innovation like the internet, or like, fire or electricity, that people talk about this. It's how does it work within our culture? How does it work within our businesses? And how do we actually utilize it to be functional and drive forward?
Yeah. So we're going to take a break. When we get back, I want to get your read on where you see that next mile of swerving. So Let's take a break.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.
All right, Doug, as promised, next week, you are going to Prague and you're going to be presenting, I want to say this correctly, Navigating the Future, the Rise of the Autonomous Enterprise at a conference in Prague amongst enterprise technology professionals, I would say, business process folks. This is an interesting moment in time for some of these enterprises because ultimately they have people who have very conscientiously put in place systems and controls and efficiencies through all of the advancements in business process automation, robotics, and or machine learning and so forth that are not inconsequential. But all of a sudden now you have this thing, generative AI, artificial intelligence, call it what you will, land, and there's a whole host of other folks who are saying, we got to bring this in. And so there's inevitably, as we've seen in past things like cloud and elsewhere, there's going to be a natural resistance just because it's not necessarily, things aren't necessarily broken. But yet there's this drive to bring in this new whiz-bang technology to create even more efficiency. And so I'm sure that dichotomy is part of what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly right. So the things that businesses, especially enterprises, have always had issues with, again, like we talked about in the previous segment, was documentation or handling meetings or meeting minutes, or even just the point of like business process operations or business process management. And so when you don't, a lot of companies, you always hear about like the shadow IT and all these things and like the normal things we've heard for years and years and years. But we've never really been able to solve it. So that's part of the problem. So now they're saying we have new technology, we have new innovation, let's solve the problem, right? And so they're saying, well, how do we solve the problem? So you have the AI group, and they're saying we built Gen AI. It's understanding nuance. It's driving this not only just like the flavor, but the understanding and like the nuance. And now, how do we understand processes? And so then they say, well, let's build agentic workflows, because then we actually take a process, understand the process, use the nuance of that to talk with the user to see what they want, and then build a workflow. Okay, that's great. Like there's some cool stuff going on right now with some open source agents using Llama, and they're essentially doing this. Like I can use the English language, I can speak to it, create actions. Those actions can drive to do some of these workflows. Fine. So AI people, that's what they're doing. The enterprise automation folks and those that actually work with the users and have already built in savings and ROI and whatnot, they're saying, hey, how do we use Gen AI? Because we want to use it in the form of maybe instead of human in the loop, we use Gen AI in the loop, and then we get better, faster, stronger because of that. And we don't need as many humans. We don't need as much human interaction as we need to. So then we can then automate, and then the humans go do all the cool stuff or bring in even more business, because there's always more business. We just never have time to do it. And half the time when that happens, we find out, we just need to hire more people, hire more bodies, essentially. But if we can avoid that, if we can avoid the hiring part, now we can just do more with the people that we have. That's the Sam Altman dream a couple months back too, right? We're going to have companies that use Gen AI and potentially automation or some form of agents in between the mix that are driving billion-dollar companies with like 1, 2, maybe 3 people. That's the goal, right? So then enterprises can actually use that same data set, use that same information, drive it forward. Now it's just a matter of who wins out, right? Are we doing agentic and we're doing this and we're in Gen AI, or are we doing the known good on the automation enterprise side, where we can actually say we can audit this, we know this, we've built this in, we understand the processes because we've had business process management, or we've had an understanding where these processes live. There's a future there, part of that is the autonomous enterprise, right? And that's where I come in and I say, hey, as a practitioner in this, multiple agents and multi-agent frameworks doing different things. So you may have an agent, that Copilot that's working with the actual user. That Copilot is going to be leveled up. It's not just going to just answer Gen AI questions and do emails. It's going to do much, much more. And I believe the future of that, when it evolves, we're going to see the Copilot actually doing process mining and task mining in the background, which is going to give it a little bit of like, not just like an ontology layer. It's going to give it that layer of understanding of, what does this user, person, employee do, and how do they do it? Because then they may do it differently than the other 5 people on their team. But then maybe with that data, like we can actually do data analytics, say, well, what's the best process here? Because maybe the 5 different ways they're doing it is not the best. But then, so now we're literally building efficiency in, and we're not saying like the agent is like calling out or spying on them. No, it's like, the whole goal of the company is not to spy. The whole goal of any company is not to spy. The goal is to make more money. So how do we do that? But by building efficiencies, but also on the automation side, everyone in the automation side would agree it's about the people. And how do you collaborate with technology? How do you use it to where it's enabling people to be better, engaged, emboldened, and efficient? And then the AI side, there's a different, camp, right? There's different people. They think slightly differently. OpenAI's stance on this is they're going to build a bunch of compute, and they're going to give everybody a bunch of shovels and say, go dig holes and see if you can find gold. And then that's the win. I mean, that's paraphrasing, but in general, they're not really thinking about the people, and you can kind of see that. So there's 2 different sides of this. And I think that's where things like the autonomous enterprise come in to where we can really drive that forward.
Yeah, I mean, I go way back, and it's been my experience that whiz-bang technology requires someone to come along with clear, valuable applications, right? The PC came along, and for a long time it was interesting, the personal computer, but it wasn't really interesting until Lotus Notes arrived. And then it was like, okay, that's the killer. That was the killer app. Now I get it.
Yeah.
Same with the internet, right? The internet existed, but it didn't really catch fire until Netscape Navigator
Google,
landed. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I see how I can interact with this thing. Mobile phones, right? We had mobile phones for a long time, but until there was an app store and Apple kind of cracked the code for mobile applications, boom, cloud computing, software as a service finally cracked the code and got people to start moving things out of their networks. I think where we're at right now is much like that, right? We have this thing. We have a mobile phone, we have a PC, we have a cloud, but we don't have yet. I think people now I'm sure you know a lot of smart people, and I'm sure you see a lot of smart people who know exactly what they're going to do with it, but they're doing that one-off. It's like, where are we, or where do you see that happening, where there's all of a sudden going to be these killer applications? Because that's next in my mind.
Yeah, it's like, well, and that all goes to use cases. And I think everybody agrees to that, right? It's how do you use what you have now? How do we build out to build something useful? And I think the first, like we can say, oh, the first thing out there is Copilot on the system. That's great. How do you know how much worth that is? You really don't. Right. So that's not going to work. That's not going to get everybody to the top enterprise. It's not going to get everybody to use agents. They may use it, but you can't ratify that. But I think really it's the expert agents. It's the ones that are going to be acting, doing, driving as if it was a professional person, a SME, a subject matter expert, or a domain expert in your own company. That agent is going to drive massive value. I think there's companies right now that are doing, this one agent that they built, this expert agent is able to not just, automate or fix something like so many times. It's like 30 times to 300 times better. And so the speed, the ease of use, all that is coming in. And really when ease of use comes in and is able to answer that one question of like how much money can be saved, that's where it really starts to turn and people go, I want one of those. And that's the same thing with like the cell phone and everything else, or AOL when it came out and you dialed up and with the 9800 baud modem and you're like, I got online, and then there's like Yahoo groups and you're like, I can talk to people. So same thing, like I can get work done. There's also the fact that like AI in general, it does remember, and they're building memory in, and the fact that it's going to remember much longer than us or the us's that are in the same job for 2 to 3 years, because usually people move around that time and they move jobs, and then that legacy data or that tribal data goes away. But what if you maintain that? What if there was an agent that maintained the data, that you wouldn't lose that?
This is to me the unfair advantage that agents are going to have, which is they don't take
sleep.
days off. They don't call in sick. They don't get ambitious and want to go work somewhere else. They don't want a promotion. They never ask for benefits or there's it's going to be the siren song. I mean, there's just no way that corporate America, the global corporate world will be able to resist not just the horsepower, the sheer loyalty of these things.
Well,
they never forget, and they never want to leave, and they never retire. It's like it's the perfect employee. It never ages.
I mean, for those watching, right? So being on the process automation side and like intelligent automation side, I do have to call out, like, we've heard a lot of this same discussion right here around they don't stop they're like perfect employees, where we have like bots, so automations. And the difference here is that agents versus bot automation, since the agents are going to be more enabled with nuance, they're going to be able to be more, not linear, but more able to like take on more. They can soak more. They're not going to fail over as much. You don't need highly intelligent coding, or you don't need teams that are massively great at building reusable parts or utilities or libraries to really drive the win. The nuance of the Gen AI can actually help a lot. And if you see an issue, or the user sees an issue, the employee sees an issue, then you can actually talk through it and say, oh, I see that this is happening. What is that? Oh, it's a caching issue, or it's an update issue. Great. Can we build something that does like a test automation? So you can build that like on the fly. And so some of these things, that's where the exciting part, right? Because we're able to answer those questions that we weren't able to answer before. And it's not as static. It's not as hard-coded. It's not as, point A to point B done. And even the developers that are doing this kind of stuff are going to be able to learn and grow more, because they're not just going to hard-code things anymore. And that's what's happened a long time ago in the past. Yeah.
So is our agents the killer app? I mean, is this the kind of first aha, I get it, I see? I mean, obviously ChatGPT kind of represents maybe an app of the value of the technology, right? Maybe it is AOL. So are agents that next level of kind of proof point that, you know what, this is doable in a meaningful way at the enterprise level? It's not just a toy anymore.
Yeah, we're gonna see different iterations, but I think OpenAI tried to. I think they see this, right. They've 100% shown that they see that this is the way, in a way, because they did the GPTs, and the GPTs that they have are essentially pseudo agents that you can build out. It's like citizen developers meets agents. It hasn't taken off too well. It's done fairly well. They're still trying to build it out and have influencers and go out there and do this. So yes, agents are going to be the way. Kind of like what we saw, just like to your example of Apple's App Store. So what if there was a large platform where everybody had a large platform, and then you have these app stores in every one of these that you're like, hey, I need to do Salesforce or ServiceNow, and I'm going to do this stuff. And I'm just like working with one of their agents, or working with one of their agents' apps extensions. And then now APIs get better, because APIs aren't always the best. I deal with people every day that say, this API is fantastic. And then you actually use it and you're like, hey, there's no data in there. Or it's like a piece of it, or the fact that if you share your screen at the wrong time and you have your API code or your secret code, like, man, you're done. You got to go change it. There's the API leakage. There's a whole other conversation on that, right? So, but in general, agents could be the biggest change, because it gives not only the collaborative effort of working with something, but it kind of does the hand holding, right? It not only is it going to help you find the answer, it's going to take the Socratic method and teach you maybe what you don't know, and then give you insight back so that you can actually take that forward. So, which again, like, we're re-enabling ourselves to do so much more. To try to draw a picture of what this looks like, the only way to look at it is like, it's like Star Trek, man. Like, it's crazy that we can talk to the computer, and it's not like the Alexa or whatever. It's or the Echo devices. It's beyond that. We're able to actually have a conversation, even to the point of like with GPT 4.0, right? So we can have that conversation even in multiple languages around the world and still drive wins. So our sales enabled, our marketing enabled. Who's not enabled? Literally everyone is enabled by building and using this technology.
Well, so this is, there's a lot going on here, but I think this is why Apple did what they did, even though they're kind of coming at it from maybe a little more B2C angle. But it strikes me that the war is going to be won by the companies that decide where it's going to be fought, right? So Microsoft wants it fought on the PC, not in the browser. Yes. Google wants it fought in the browser. Apple wants it fought on the phone. Nvidia wants it fought on the GPU. It's fascinating because in the end, it's like, Nvidia's talking about these, the NIMs on, they don't care about browsers. They want the PC to be
they want the factory. They're building.
They want more hardware delivered, right? Microsoft wants they're fighting on the operating system level. They want it to sit on the PC. Apple is playing in a whole different ecosystem, but they're playing in an operating system and obviously in an app environment but Google's I think it's going to be fascinating because in the end, I think what we found with mobile devices and ultimately cybersecurity around these edge devices is that there will be workers who will be getting massive benefits out of some of these B2C AI technologies and coming to their companies and saying, how come I can't do boom, boom, boom at work?
Well, that was what GPT did, right? Like OpenAI forced that conversation because it said it's free to everybody. Like just go to our website, use it. And then literally everybody goes to work and goes, I'm way more efficient using their tools. Why can't I do that? And every company goes, wait, what? Hold on.
Exactly.
But they don't realize because people have kind of been, I don't know, I mean, it's hard to say, but we've been kind of like complacent or brainwashed to the fact that like when we do download these apps and they're free, nothing's ever really free. Like they're going to use your data. And they
people
use all the data.
Don't recognize that. They're definitely not recognizing that. But I think a lot of organizations didn't recognize that initially either.
Well, they didn't know how much mining they could do, and they could do a lot of mining with AI. So
well, and to your earlier point, if they are truly running out of data,
free data.
Well, and I think they even had to come out and basically say out loud, we're going to scrape everything unless you tell us we can't. I mean, it's an opt out. Right. It's not an opt in, which is got its own set of ethics that they need to dance around, but I don't think people are aware of how it. And again, I don't think that ends well necessarily.
Well,
for some frontline workers, I just don't think that ends well.
There's a lot of conversations there on, like we said, there's the AI approach and the Agentic era that we're moving into. That Jim Fan, everybody said that there's the intelligent automation where we're utilizing Gen AI and whatnot and building and looking to build agents, but both are looking to build agents in slightly different ways. However, the human loses in one of these categories or both, and that's when you have the Elon Musks of the world saying, in the future AI is going to take everyone's jobs and we need a universal basic income. And you're like, well, hold on, And my first thought, I was like, this guy's crazy, but I was like, he's not crazy. He's done fairly well in business. You have to look at people's perspective. And this is why I say like, hey, my perspective is not an AI researcher. I'm an actual intelligent automation practitioner and Gen AI user and whatnot. So perspective is key. And his perspective, Elon Musk's perspective, and if you take like his first principle approach and you say like, what is he seeing? And from what he's seeing at the very high end level, at the, talking to these other platforms and driving it, he sees, yes, if we stay down where we are and stay on that same path where compute is king, as, Sam Altman and the team has said, we'll be computing around humans and not with humans. And so we have to start deciding like, what future do we want? Do we want the future where technology tells us what to do? Or do we want the future where we are still working with it because I think there's going to be a massive concerns when we don't have our own controls anymore.
Yeah, so let's take a break, and when we get back, we'll wrap this up by talking a little bit about where we're headed and what that future might look like.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. And if you prefer to listen, please rate and review the Insight Jam podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, Doug, we're back, and we're going to put a bow on this particular topic of agents and agentic AI. Give me your read about what you see. I mean, and when I say look at the future, I'm saying, what do you see in the next 6 months or a year?
Yeah.
Because honestly, it's like one of these massive games where it's just rendering as it spins out. So who knows what the future holds, but what do you see in the immediate future?
Yeah, I mean, in the immediate future, kind of like what we were talking about earlier with agents, is you have Microsoft that came out a couple of weeks now, probably about a week and a half, about how they said, hey, in Copilot, we're actually taking screenshots. And so it's actually literally talking about the same thing I'm talking about when I say the future of Copilot is really process mining, task mining, which is going to become process discovery, right? So they're trying to define process discovery from some of the different vendors that are out there that are doing this now.
So let me just make sure I understand. So they're taking screenshots of actual requests or Copilot request. What are they screenshotting?
Yeah. So when you're using Copilot and either talking to it or typing prompts or utilizing the tool, and so you're saying, hey, I want to make an image of a giraffe, playing basketball. It's going to say, oh, they did this. Well, why did they do that? And it's going to try to understand the contextual understanding of it.
So in addition to delivering the request against the prompt,
right,
they're capturing the process of the request.
Yeah, kind of capturing like what the employee's doing in a very nuanced sense to kind of understand like a day in the life, to start to understand like context, like what do they do, why do they do, and how do they do it. And so it's going to get more and more, right? And right now they're testing just that history portion of it. If I take a picture, I get a history, that history gives me data, and that data gives me insights. And so if they can do that and still keep it kind of lightweight, it's not going to impact the user. They're not going to see any difference. Fantastic, right? So they're getting the benefit out of it by using it. They're able to answer that, blank page approach or emails and whatnot. And then it starts to understand the context. But I think my belief is that it's going to evolve and do literal process mining. Like, what exactly is the user doing? What exactly is the task that they're handling? And then if you marry those two together, you get process discovery, like, oh, that's what they were doing in SAP. That's what they were doing with their accounts receivable or that finance report that they were building. Huh, that's interesting because this person over here is doing the same thing. Maybe one person stops doing that same thing and we actually drive it as a process. And then essentially, as agents, if this is how these agents are going to work, that would go to like a center of excellence or a center of enablement. We call these COEs. And that team would go, oh man, hey, we got insights. We know what's going on. We can see that 5 teams are doing the same stuff. Let's just actually normalize that, build it for them, drive it forward. Now that team is saving time and can go do more. And so that's where some of these wins can really happen.
So do you see Microsoft as having, at least within the enterprise, because of their operating system being arguably more predominant in a business case, do you see them with an advantage here in terms of being able to build these things out versus what Apple's trying to do with their Apple Intelligence across multiple operating systems, but many far more pervasive mobile or tablet based versus that laptop, desktop?
So Microsoft is, we have to look at history, I guess, right? So Microsoft is great at doing new innovative things, although they did like HoloLens with VR and AR type of workmanship, and then they kind of dropped it. And then that's when Meta or Facebook turned into Meta and they said, hey, we're going to do that. So they did the same thing with like the cell phone. They did the same thing with Instead of like the what was it, the iPod, they had the Zune, and that failed. So
Well,
they do different things.
but in fairness, I remember when they decided that they didn't care for Netscape Navigator anymore, and they put in or Internet Explorer native to every operating system. And I believe they were called before Congress and sued 9 ways to Sunday, but they won, and they're famous for it. That was Bill Gates at his most lethal. Was they were going to win the internet, and they did. They absolutely blew Netscape right out of the water when they wanted to, and as they've tried that in subsequent go rounds, it hasn't gone well. But this may be one of those go rounds where it does.
It may, and again, but like to that same point, where as an operating system, as a company, most companies work on utility patents, and utility patents last about 20 years. And so they always have to re-up that patent. That's why the whole system changes, or the kernel changes, or like the way that they just, I think it was last year, they changed like how SharePoint buttons worked. It was interesting stuff. But so Internet Explorer became part of the integrated operating system. So this will turn into much probably the same thing, right? So they're going to use this over time to continue that utility, every 20 years, they're going to drive some new innovative change. We saw how Power Automate came in because during like COVID and lockdowns, everything, automation, intelligent automation took off like crazy. Microsoft says, let's do Power Automate. And there's some really great functions in there, but then there's a lack of orchestration. There's a lack of really intelligent automation, but it still does automation at its core. So then with these agents and these copilots, which I can't even count how many copilots there are when I saw the last list from Microsoft, but there's a lot of different copilots. But they've built that into Edge, right? So Edge has Copilot, and they try to kind of give that one for free. They also have it built into their Windows 11 like operating system, right? Oh, hey, it has Copilot built into it, but each one is a separate Copilot. I think the future is going to be maybe they do their own multi-agent framework in a way, and these copilots turn into something else. And again, like to the point where I was making is where currently the copilots are starting to capture that history. When they start to do the process mining and task mining and really process discovery, that's going to be a game changer, because you're literally enabling enterprises to finally understand what's going on. Because for years, there's Lean Six Sigma, there's PMO, project management offices trying to do the same thing. And again, humans, we don't like to document. And some of it's a cultural thing. Some of it's a very, we were just raised that way. And some of us, we just don't like typing stuff or writing stuff down. So,
the stakes are incredibly high, obviously. And that was actually exhibited very clearly with the amount of money that Microsoft poured into OpenAI last year. But I thought it was really interesting that Apple came out with their Apple Intelligence and flopped on the table that they actually have ChatGPT baked into it, which is kind of an interesting commingling of loyalties, of technologies. I can't believe that they're going to keep that there for very long. But I thought it was interesting because they needed that. Apple needed that. They didn't have that, and they needed
it to show up, right? They needed to show up. Like they haven't shown up in the AI space. They have Siri and stuff like that, but it's not really AI at this point. But with this new stuff that come out, I still look at different aspects and look at the company as a whole, right? And we know that they've taken over the mobile phone business. I even talked about this recently, but they're the only one that have text messages that are crypto secure, like not crypto secure, but like quantum secure. So even a quantum computer supposedly cannot break the encryption on the messages on our iPhones. And I was like, that's really cool to know. I'm glad they did that. I didn't know we needed it, but hey, we probably need it. So the difference though is Apple doing that. I think that they had to do that, not just to show up and be in the game, because everybody knows that they're building their own thing. Every platform is, but since Microsoft came out with the NPUs and that chipset that was a neural processing unit that's driving these AI interactions on the actual systems, Apple was like, well, great, I have to show up. And so they said, let's go make a deal. But you have to remember, in history-wise, they made the same deal when they built like the reason why the App Store is so great is because they made deals with Epic Games, and they made deals with all these other people that had app stores, and they made these deals. I mean, even having, they paid Google millions of some odd number to have Chrome on Apple iPhone. Why? But do they need it now? I'm pretty sure they may not need it now, because if they're using an LLM from OpenAI to do search with Siri, they don't need it. And so they're going to save money on this deal potentially and still show up and be able to drive a very emphatic mobile phone solution.
So again, to kind of come back to our broader point here, with regard to what you mentioned earlier around Copilot, is Copilot kind of the gateway drug for agents for people in terms of how to think about them? I mean, is that the way it'll work?
Yeah.
It shows up in your sidebar and says, I'm here to help, and you can get it to do things that you can't imagine you would ever be able to do with
I think,
automation.
the gateway drug is one way, I guess. So I think those of us that are old enough to remember Clippy, like the little clip guy that's like tapping on the screen.
Yeah.
I mean,
Clippy. Well, you know what?
It could come back.
That was
about it.
I mean, truth be told, I mean, Clippy got screwed.
Clippy got a bad deal.
I think Clippy was actually not a bad play, but he got screwed. And I think, again, the super smarties are the ones that killed Clippy, not the people who needed Clippy. The people who needed Clippy needed Clippy.
Right, but I think that interaction that we had way back when of just like, oh, it's an assistant. Oh, I didn't know I could do that in Microsoft Word when we all were learning this stuff, right? So that kind of companion, that Copilot, I think has an opportunity to come back, because we have to remember, in the workforce that all of us are in, there's like 4 generations of people. And how do you interact with them all? Because the older 2 generations aren't as savvy as the younger 2 generations. And so the younger 2 are like, I don't need Clippy. But the older 2 are like, that would be fantastic if I had a little bit of a help to really drive that nuance and really understand it. And so I think that's going to be that gateway. And I think the Copilot side of that is people are going to say, you know what? And you hear this a lot, and I don't like repeating everybody, but you hear it a lot. But it's the future of AI is not the how it outdoes people. It's the person that's using it that's going to outdo all the rest of the other people that aren't using it, right? And so there's that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I used to buy my music in a store, and I used to buy music 10 songs at a time on a little silver disc, and before that on a big wax disc. It's the world changes whether we like it or not, and this is just this is going to. I don't think people have, again, to your point around the generations, right? This to me was the cloud resistance when cloud computing came along, is that the old guard didn't want anything to do with it because it just reflected to them as absolutely, we'll never do that. That's the worst thing we could do, is allow our data out into the cloud. But the younger generations who are growing up on Salesforce.com and all the other kind of software as a service, as they grew in power, they started making very different decisions. And the truth of the matter is,
speed wins. Yeah.
The old guard, and I'm probably a part of that, is looking at AI and saying, I only have to deal with it for 5 or 10 years. so it isn't coming for me. So, but I think the younger people are going to have to deal with it for decades, and that's going to be a very different interaction. And there's a lot of societal issues going on here. But those are conversations we're going to have for another time, because there's whole rabbit holes we can go down here with regard to AI, and I couldn't be happier to be doing this with you. You're a practitioner. You're out there. You're making things happen. You're seeing things happen, and you're also talking to a whole bunch of other people who are in a similar spot for the perspective that we're going to get. So I'm looking forward to rolling this out with you, Doug. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a subject matter that it like I was saying at the break, it's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, we're going to have lots to talk about.
Every week there's a change or a new acronym, right? So that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for the time today. We're going to do this every couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about on the next episode. So stay tuned.